we are up to the closing session of today. I hope we all had our fruitful discussions before that. And now the last, a very last report of today. And I would introduce the last speaker, last but not least, of course. She is Ekaterina Travkina, and she is Coordinator, Culture, Creative Industries and Local Development from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And she is joining us from Paris. And your questions are most welcome. Please put them into the chat box. Ekaterina, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much, and I'm very happy to be here, and a big thank you for inviting me, and I also really very much enjoyed all the discussions today from the very morning, learning from the international projects, and now I attended, in fact, the session with Kaunas, and I was overwhelmed, honestly, with all the breadth and richness of what's going on there, and well, maybe I have a bit of a special feeling for the work on the modernism architecture, and well, it was mentioned that architectural optimism there, because I love very much this style, and I was impressed by the whole variety of things that are happening there, with the traveling exhibitions, restoration workshops, consultation and education activities, the work with the owners of the buildings, with the community, with those who live in these buildings, conferences, international summer schools, etc. So laboratories. So for me, it's really an excellent example for all of us to learn on how to help reconquer the identity of the place, rebuild it, rethink it. So it's an example of arts and community regeneration and many other things, education and etc. with quite a number of more tangible outcomes. And of course, well, I loved all the two presentations on entrepreneurship, skills building, Minded Entrepreneurship Academy, and the Startup Accelerator. So there we spoke about the creative skills, the design mindset that is needed, and of course, the innovative way to support the startup and business development within the creative sectors. So a lot for us to learn, for me, to learn from that, and I was really particularly interested in that because currently the OECD, we are doing a review on cultural and creative sectors in Lithuania with a special focus on Klaipėda, Neringa and Palanga. So of course, I would love to reach out to all the speakers to learn a bit more the nitty-gritty of how and what they do. I was a bit worried when I was listening to all the presentations from this morning up till our breakout sessions, because I was thinking, so what can I really add here that could be of interest to people? And something that I heard several times is that okay, that's very interesting, but is the local government helping you? What's your interaction with the local authorities? Are they aware about all these potentials? Do they help, etc.? And maybe it's in this area that the OECD contribution can be hopefully useful, because we don't work so much, as you know, with ministries of culture. This is not our mandate. UNESCO is working with the Ministry of Culture and some other organizations, but we probably complement this work because our constituency, our counterpart in the governments are the ministries of economic development, regional development, city development, employment, inclusion, etc. So we see our mission as really explaining to these policymakers the true value of culture, how culture can help achieve their goals, these broader economic and social development goals. So, and of course, as we know, very often they see, well, culture as a leisure, as a cost, etc. So they don't necessarily see clearly this link between culture and their own objectives, right? So what we're trying to do is really to demonstrate, to capture all these wider impacts. Another thing that I thought maybe can still be useful is that we didn't hear so much about the, not so much about the impact of the crisis, obviously. I mean, we all lived through it, and Rijeka mentioned it, and all the projects had to reimagine, readapt very quickly, so fall and jump very quickly with the new project design, new new approaches. But maybe what was a bit not mentioned is how really the sector suffered in terms of jobs, in terms of revenues, incomes. So maybe still my presentation can highlight some of these aspects. Okay, I go into the presentation now. Let me see. Voila. So I wanted to maybe quite briefly present this overview that we prepared on the impact of the crisis on cultural and creative sectors across OECD countries. So obviously, well, the impact was very dramatic, and we know that well, the sectors represent quite substantial shares of employment across our cities and regions in the OECD, and substantial contribution to GDP as well. Well, you can see here some of the data and how the crisis really affects different places, with a lot of impact on capital cities, on large cities where there is a high concentration of creative sectors. But this is a very conservative estimate, because as we know, the data that we have, the official statistics, they don't capture the full employment in the sector. They don't capture the secondary employment, the voluntary work, and this is something that well, it's quite a barrier for many policymakers to understand the real scope of the sector. And this really reflects how the sector is structured. So we all know that, of course, there are a couple of very big international private players there, but most of the firms and people working in the sector are self-employed, micro businesses, creative professionals. They combine sometimes a salaried job half-time, and then they are self-employed. So they are not at all captured in the official statistics. Well, we also see that not all sectors were affected in the same way. Of course, the so-called venue-based sectors, museums, festivals, had a very dramatic impact. But some others, like firms in the digital sector, and especially the big streaming platforms, they saw their revenues increase, with an underlying question of how these revenues are distributed down to the creators of the work. Let me move maybe to the next slide. Yes, well, a few months ago when we were doing this analysis, and maybe some of these conclusions remain still valid, we had this rather pessimistic conclusion that the effects of this crisis will be long-lasting. So they are very dramatic, very profound, and potentially long-lasting. And it's quite important maybe to underline this when we speak to different policymakers, because there were a lot of rescue packages there, but if the effects are long-lasting, well, this investment should continue. Why do we think that the effects will be long-lasting? Well, because still today, a lot of cultural institutions, even if they reopen, like museums or theaters, they work at a reduced capacity, which means their revenue streams and ticketing revenues are still very much reduced. So if, for example, museums, they had to stop the contracts with external freelancers, well, a few months ago, now they are not in a position to rehire them. So these people, they lost their incomes, and they will have to go away and find maybe a job in some other sectors, not necessarily cultural or creative. We also saw that there was this tremendous drop in investment in future production. What do we mean here? For example, festivals, or book festivals or film festivals, they are not only useful for community regeneration and to bring the tourists' dollars to be spent when people come and visit the festivals, but they are platforms for making the deals. So people come to sell their future production there. Writers, I don't know, filmmakers or musicians. And as festivals were cancelled, all this future revenues, all this investment didn't happen, and we're filling this gap in the investment today and still in the months to come. Also, of course, we saw this increased investment and rescue packages from the private sector, from the philanthropy organizations. But as maybe now they redesign their priorities, we can expect some of this to drop as well. If there are no incentives introduced by the government to incentivize private donations, etc. And we also see that there's a likely reduction in public funding, especially at subnational level. And I wanted to show this chart, which shows that in OECD countries, the subnational government expenditure in culture represents up to 60, well, roughly 60% of the overall government expenditure in the area. And of course, local budgets are under enormous strain now after the crisis during the, well, in the coming months or years. So all this depicts a rather worrying picture. Well, of course, we also, well, there was, as I was saying, a tremendous response both from the government, from the public sector in terms of public funding, employment support, business support and structural policies. And this was very much also accompanied, obviously, by the local government efforts, the private sector itself, the foundations and the collective management organizations, all introducing different measures. But we, maybe when we think about the government responses, what we saw very clearly is that, and I mean, I think the message is very loud there, that a lot of these measures, they were not adapted to the specificities of employment and business models in the creative sectors. So, okay, they were introduced, but were the creative professionals able to access them? In many cases, not. So they were excluded from what was offered to the others, but not to them. So this really underlined the urgency to inject flexibility, for example, in government public employment schemes, etc. Well, obviously, as mentioned today already by all the presenters, what are the opportunities now? And well, of course, they were before, but maybe now in the crisis, they become even more visible. Opportunities of these different crossovers between cultural and creative sectors and other areas, like through digital. And we heard a lot already about the virtual reality and the new experience economy in some of the presentations. Obviously, the crossovers with education. It was very obvious during the lockdown periods, but even more clear today. And we also heard today about the creative thinking, about the design thinking. So that's probably the contribution and the overlap, well, the contribution of cultural and creative sectors to building the skills needed for the future. And of course, the crossovers with health and well-being. And if before it was more of a qualitative understanding of professionals who work in art therapy activities or in the health sector as well. Well, they were saying that, yes, we as those who do it and who use it, we see the value. But now, with the publication of the World Health Organization's scoping review on this area, I think those who were having doubts about this are really changing their minds. And of course, well, there are all these enormous crossovers with tourism, which was also extremely affected, but now there's an opportunity to rethink and create new models of creative tourism. As I was saying, maybe one of my last messages here is that, so what are the conclusions for the future? And the conclusions for policies may be other than cultural. So, of course, well, there is a need to for the support to reach the creative professionals and firms, well, encourage investment in cultural production. But as I was saying, it's very important to rethink the self-employment schemes and income support measures so that they are adapted to the new and hybrid forms of employment. And, well, this is not so new, but maybe there is an urgency now to widen innovation supports to cater for non-technological innovation and improve very much access of creative firms to business startup and development finance, and maybe well, pay a bit more attention on how to leverage the intangible assets there. Maybe with more broader messages that we're trying to convey through our work is that there is indeed this need to, well, view culture not as a cost, but rather as an economic and social investment. There is a need to culture-proof all these different policies so that there is a level playing field for creative professionals and firms in terms of their access to employment, innovation, and business support measures. And, well, there is this need to mainstream culture as a part of other policy agendas. so that they also integrate it to achieve these broader social and economic goals. And as OECD, of course, we always call for better data and for the need to gather more evidence. And as in the OECD, I work in the program which is called Local Economic and Employment Development. Of course, we also pay a lot of attention to the capacity of local governments, or beyond the cultural departments in local governments, to integrate culture in the broader economic and social development strategies. So maybe, what do you think? Maybe I can stop here and we can discuss. I don't think we hear you.
You hear me now? Can you hear? Thank you. Thank you. Sorry for these inconveniences called COVID-19. Do you think that this question I have from the last slide that you had? Do you think that cultural sector is still largely underestimated by governments, by businesses, by media? And what can be done to sell this idea that culture is an investment, as you had said?
Well, I guess it is very much so, because when we stay in the cultural circles, when we preach to the converted, of course, everyone knows that there is a lot of value, social impact, cohesion, urban regeneration, community identity, etc. So we all know the words, and I mean, we know the words, but you people, you do you do all this. But when we go out of these cultural circles, there is always this skepticism, and well, okay, that's nice, yes. Well, I also like to go to the museum, yeah, I enjoy it. But show me the evidence, economic impact. But there is just this tiny percentage of jobs there. Or I don't know, well, impact on health, you say. So I think, yes, there is a lot still to be done to sell, in a way, this agenda with better data, well, as I was saying. But without this, it's not possible to convince the Ministry of Economy or Ministry of Finance. If you don't show the true share of cultural employment, and in my presentation, I didn't even mention, okay, we can't capture the second jobs, the volunteer work, but we can't even capture the jobs outside of the creative sectors. Well, these famous designers who work for the automotive industry. In the statistics, they don't appear. But in some regions, they will, if we count all these guys, this will double the size of cultural and creative employment, okay? So with this kind of arguments, I think we can convince, we can build convincing story for the other perspectives.
Maybe this happens because the very concept of how we understand culture is still too narrow. As you had mentioned, we're down to arts, basically. And I think it's not the way to go, because we must think broader. We must understand culture far more sophisticatedly, so to say.
Well, in a way, well, I'm not sure about if it's sophisticated. It's just counting things. It's really putting the list of sectors that are there and explaining their economic impact in terms of jobs, revenues, and I'm not even talking about the impact assessment studies that count the induced, well, the supply chain effects. These are important as well, but just capturing the real size of the sector is pretty important. And there are, I mean, and then also capturing all this innovation spillovers and crossovers, as we say now. Yes, cultural and creative sectors are an R&D provider for many other sectors, right? So cultural as well, not just the creative ones. And then they should be recognized as such. And then, well, hopefully this question whether they should be subsidized and there should be continued public funding for them. should not have the right to exist, because also in cultural and creative sectors, with this public funding, there is this freedom to experiment and to come up with new ideas for other sectors across the economy. So, voilà.
Ekaterina, thank you very much. Thank you, thank you. And I'm afraid this concludes our day today, and this concludes our seminar. Big thanks to all of you from us here, from the team in Kaunas, and see you in Kaunas in January the 22nd next year. Let's meet in person, okay? Thank you. Goodbye.